So, hello everybody. My name is Ella. I'm one of the engineering managers at Bloom and Wild. I haven't put my Twitter up on here because it is a bit of a wasteland these days, personally. So this is my second time at Agile on the beach. I'm super happy to be here again. And I'm joined by...
I'm Steve. I'm VP Engineering at Bloom and Wild. I'm holding on to Twitter just with my fingernails at the moment. But yeah, let's see how long that lasts. So also, we're both on LinkedIn, so that's probably a better place to actually, if you want to kind of ask questions after this, you don't catch either of us at the rest of the conference. So we both work for Bloom and Wild. Bloom and Wild's Europe's largest online flower delivery company. I've been doing talks for a while. I used to say, put your hand up if you heard of Bloom and Wild. I don't bother anymore because I think a lot of people have heard of us. We're a family of 3 brands across 8 different countries with a couple of acquisitions. And we have a technology team of 65 people. So, and if you remember only one thing out of this presentation and you don't really remember too much about the remote working, you might remember the 15% off discount code if you love our flowers. So, so I'll pause for a second if anyone wants to take a photo of that. Let's move on.
Cool. So before we kind of dig into it, just interested to hear from the room in terms of what people's working styles are. So hands up if folk are like fully in the office 5 days a week, all the time. A couple, very few. Okay, cool. What about totally remote? So like, yeah, okay, quite a lot. And some sort of in-betweeny, hybrid. Okay. And when we're talking hybrid, are we talking like 3 days a week? No, okay. Less, 1 day a week, 2 days, 2 days, okay, cool. And what about like less than once a month? Just like sometimes, yeah. And yeah, exactly. So it's like, does that count? I don't know. That's kind of how I operate anyway. I'm kind of once a quarter kind of person. We're calling it kind of mostly remote, but we'll get into that in a bit. So this is our website way back when. It was pretty snazzy, as you can see. We started really small. We had a single proposition, letters, flowers through the letterbox. And just in the UK, small Ruby on Rails app, small group of engineers all working together, collaborating, getting stuff done. And this was us. This was the life. People and Post-it notes. And we'd been in person from the start. So we grew from a couple of people in the office to 100-ish people, all working 9 to 5, commuting in, collaborating, working together, all that good stuff. It's probably that where you used to work was like this too. Maybe a few less flowers. And our culture stemmed from places like this. So we had a little office, we had everyone working together, collaborating. It was all jolly. Sometimes people decided to wear grey T-shirts on the same day. Great for photos.
Yeah, we're not like cargo cult, all dressed as Bloom and Wild. But it's the nicest smelling office I've ever worked in, so it's well worth it. So and then I guess I probably don't need to tell you what happened, but I'm going to tell you my little story of how it happened to me. I'm not sure whether it's a faux pas to put a picture of you speaking at another conference up while speaking at a conference, but hey, here we go. So I'm on stage there at QCon in 2020, so in March 2020, and doing my presentation, minding my own business, get off the stage, hear that a couple of people that are at the conference have tested positive for COVID. And so I go home and travel in the following day because we were a 9 to 5, 5 days a week sort of a business. And I thought, on the way in, it's probably just like, it's nice if I just let our people team know where I've been and the fact there were a couple of positive cases there. So I just dropped them a quick Slack message and I got a response back super quick. And that's what it said. And that's kind of what I thought. No dinosaurs were involved. So I got my train to Waterloo. I walked round to another platform. I got my train back home. And I didn't go back in the office for about 18 months after that. And I'm sure that's an experience a lot of you had as well. I think it's a really, really typical one. And our office was a really super vibrant, lovely smelling, beautiful place, and it turned into this. So just plastic bags over the chairs, nobody there, dust. Dare I say it, quite a lot of dead plants and flowers. I suspect it didn't smell very nice when the first person went back in afterwards, but it wasn't me.
So we all suddenly went remote, and to begin with, it was kind of novel. It was actually just before our biggest peak, which was UK Mother's Day. So we quickly adapted to working from home. We went on lunchtime walks. This is a picture from Steve's walk, which is rather scenic, I must say. People figured out how to get discounts on their trains that they paid for the year. We played loads and loads of online games and online escape rooms and did online cocktail making and online clay modelling. Lots of fun happened. But, generally, after a little while, things started to turn into this. People began to be less engaged. Calls turned into this a little bit. We stopped seeing people's faces. People were like, I'm not doing another online cocktail evening, please leave me alone. And even like photos of people's lockdown haircuts stopped losing their hilarity. So what reduces engagement? So we've got like lack of social connection. So this is like non-verbal communication. What happens when you're just in person together, making a cup of tea in the kitchen, having a chat? What's happened at the weekend? Going for lunch, going to the pub. Not having these kind of water cooler moments can negatively impact employee performance. And increased social distance. So this refers to all those kind of cues that you get when you're working together. How do people like to work? You're no longer seeing, okay, this person's got their headphones on. Maybe I'm not going to go over there and interrupt them with something in this moment of time. I'll leave them for a bit. So like, what are people's skills and expertise? What are their working styles? How do we make all of this kind of happen cohesively in a team environment? It's kind of, you can say, okay, this is the most important thing to be working on, but you're not necessarily working as effectively as you could be. Screen fatigue. So we all suddenly spent loads and loads of time on video calls. I think especially at the beginning, people tended to over-index on this. So you're having like, I've got to do a check-in in the morning and the afternoon just to make sure everyone's okay. We all got sick of doing that and also looking at our own faces a lot of the time, which we weren't used to. Time scarcity. So your days are suddenly full. You had back-to-back meetings, whereas in the office, that just wouldn't happen. You'd be like, okay, I can see this person's here. They've got to actually physically get from this place to that place. We can't just go 3 hours of meetings in a row. That's not viable. So all of this, you're losing the ability to build bonds, and people are starting to get bored and disengaged.
And the interesting thing is, this is obviously, I don't need to say this to you, this isn't a Bloom and Wild problem. We're all finding remote working hard. And what I find quite interesting is when you look at there's multiple different surveys obviously being done on remote working, the effect of remote working. Incidentally, I very much recommend the Buffer State of Remote Work survey. It's very, very accessible, very easy to look at, lots of incredibly useful data if you're interested in the remote working space. But people are finding it hard. People are saying team workers, got more difficult when we're not all together. But here's the interesting thing. So it's getting harder, and we're all thinking this is difficult, but we all still want to keep working remotely, don't we? And it's that juxtaposition between your kind of, well, you like to say your professional life and your personal life. The reality is you can never separate those two things. They're just life, and there are advantages to being able to work remotely. But we've got this tension between wanting to work remotely, and as we saw from you folks when you gave us an idea about your working patterns earlier, you are all working more remotely, but how do you keep the engagement high? Because that's what's making it hard. Now, for Bloom and Wild, it was actually even a little bit harder than that. And so not only did we have our biggest peak ever 3 weeks after we went into lockdown, but we were very, very lucky. We had some very good sales through the pandemic, as you might expect. And we spent the money acquiring other companies. So we acquired the Dutch company, Bloemon. And then a couple of months later, while we were still all working remotely and in lockdown, we bought another company, the French company Bergamot, and that's how we've got the 3 brands that we have. So not only here have we got this whole point of a group of people that already knew each other working remotely, but we've also got acquisitions and trying to integrate teams together. And anyone who's ever done an acquisition or been part of an acquisition will know how difficult it is to get that cultural integration. And getting that cultural integration when you're all on video calls is super, super hard. And the team grew. This shows how our team grew over that period. So we were also still deciding to hire like crazy. And we, at that stage, started hiring more people that were fully remote. Up to that stage, I think in the engineering team, we had a single person that was fully remote, whereas we started hiring more. We've now got 30% of our engineering team. So our engineering team's 50 people. 30% of those folks are on fully remote contracts, sometimes in the UK, sometimes in other parts of the EU. And so this is what we look like now. So this is kind of our problem space, and the problem space that we're looking at our squads assemble concept with. So we're a 6-squad engineering team, and squads map to product and technology domains, and with some supporting teams. And all of these folks in all of these teams are working in our mostly remote model. So mostly remote, meaning you could come to the office if you want to, but there's no actual obligation to do so. So this is our experience so far of remote working. But what's your experience? So what I'd like you to do, think of a word that sums up your experience of remote working to date, and then turn to the person next to you, or maybe the person behind you, or if you're sat miles away from someone, maybe shove up a little bit, and just talk to them about that word, that experience. We'll take maybe a minute or two on this.
I love the nervous. Yeah, we didn't start at 15 minutes.
Oh, 15 in. I'll start talking. So you've got to take, just got to say that if that hits half an hour, we're over.
Yeah.
We'll give that a minute and then I'll stop. Should we try the hand up thing to get them to?
Yeah.
I love the hand.
Who wants to share? Yeah.
We'll see who the agilists are. Like, in 30 seconds, I'll stick my hand up to see whether everyone starts chatting up.
So I find it like pass by.
I think it's perfect.
Just ask them to share some of that.
I'm going to you guys. You always pop up. It's hilarious. It's just like
I know. It
it's like
disappears.
yeah. I should probably get to shut up. Okay. Right. Thank you. Right. Would anybody like to share their remote working word? Anyone?
Yeah.
Freedom? Privilege?
Lazy.
Lazy? Isolated.
Tiring.
Tiring? Yep.
Inefficient.
Inefficient. Interesting. Slower? Yep. Yeah, and that's, I guess, the key thing here is, and if you think about, there are pros and cons to remote working, and experiences are very different depending on your context, and very, very different depending on the sort of team that you're working in. So, thank you for doing that. Hopefully you had a good conversation. Hopefully maybe you met someone new. I don't know. So we in Bloomwell we had a decision to make ultimately when we were able to go back to our office. Is do we accept this hybrid working model or do we just force everybody back? And some companies seem to like doing this. Some are working like 3-2 splits and stuff like that. Some companies are working like 5 days. All go back to the office, please. Which I would argue is probably not a very sensible thing. Now, what we've settled upon is our mostly remote model. So there's no obligation to go back to the office. You can go back to the office if it works for you, and if it's easier for you, if it's something you enjoy doing. So for me, I like to go back a day a week. And there are some things I don't miss going back a day a week. So this station platform in the dark, normally waiting for a train that should have been there a while ago.
And going remote enabled me to move to Sussex. So now I get to look at some greenery out of my window, which is much nicer than the brick wall I was looking at before. And yes, I do always, of course, have a bouquet on my desk. And then the only traffic that I encounter on the school run is livestock, which is a darn sight better than the Hackney gridlock that I used to deal with. So yeah, as we kind of alluded to earlier, there are pros and cons, right, to all of this. We've spoken about some of the negative impacts of going fully remote, but also some of the personal pros that it brought. But getting in together in real life is really important because this is what drives connection to each other. This is us all on a jolly to Paris a little while ago. See if you can see me and Steve. Connection to our work, why we're here, what we're doing, what's it all about, and connection to the brand. So this is particularly important for people who joined like after we'd gone remote because they hadn't had that kind of experience of being in the office. Our reception area does not always look like this. It's not always a ball pit. This was for a Crystal Maze inspired evening that we were doing. So just to highlight these stats again, remote working has suddenly become a pillar of how we work. This wasn't expected, but it's brought lots of kind of positives in terms of work-life balance for people. This flexibility plays a really key role in sustaining and attracting really key talent, and it's not something that's easy to take away, and rightly so. So what's going on is that a lot of companies see the benefits of remote work, and that number seems to be increasing. However, some companies are changing their view. Could this be down to lack of trust and increased leverage as a result of contractions within the tech industry? And do companies feel like there's less risk now in taking away that remote working? Fortunately, at Bloom & Wild, we still see the benefit of remote work, and we continue to offer it.
There's some brilliant clickbaity headlines there, weren't there? I feel a little bit wrong for putting some of those in the slides, so I'm sorry. Increasingly we're working remotely, and what's kind of interesting here is that while companies are supporting remote working, there are some things that are very easy or easier to support. So, for example, it's easy to put tools in place. So if your hardest decision is, do we go with Google Meet or do we go with Zoom, then I'd argue you're probably focusing on the wrong problem. And it's quite easy to do things like run regular one-to-one meetings. It's almost too easy to do them too frequently because, again, there's a trust thing, or you're worried about people because they're out of sight, out of mind. But what people are missing is that ability to connect, and that ability to connect either through their work or socially. And that's it's really, really important to focus upon. how do we help a team form and maintain social bonds? And there's an interesting, when we're looking at the ways in which we do this, and particularly around the different meetings we have, we found the convergent versus divergent meeting framework to be a really, really useful guide for us to give our teams to say, like, how are you using this meeting? What sort, do you need this meeting to be face-to-face? Do you want it to be face-to-face? Do you think it would work remotely? And so the whole point around convergent to divergent thinking, it's a framework, psychologist J.P. Guilford came up with this in the 1950s. And the way it looks is, if you just click the next slide. So convergent thinking itself, it focuses on reaching that one defined solution to a problem. So that suits a certain sort of problem solving. And I don't know, let's use a particular example of some convergent thinking. So let's say you are in an office, let's say the printer in the office breaks. And you immediately think, right, I need to phone the technician up, the technician's going to come and fix the printer. One very clearly defined solution to the problem. So that's a convergent thinking approach. Whereas divergent thinking is where you need much more creativity and understanding involved. So there may be multiple solutions to a problem. There may be multiple ways of playing through that. So, for example, if you're thinking divergently about your printer problem, you might first go and, I don't know, look up how to fix your printer on YouTube. Or you might see whether there's someone in the office who knows how to take a paper jam out of a printer, rather than going just straight to that one particular solution. And we can apply this to meetings. So if we think about the sort of meeting that a convergent approach would suit, so where you're trying to get people to converge on a particular outcome. So you're trying to get them to get a consistent level of understanding and move to a particular outcome. And a lot of meetings are about this. You're trying to align people around something, and the outcome of the meeting is that everybody's aligned, they've made a decision, they're going to move on with some particular piece of work, for example. So convergent meetings, these can work very, very well with a pre-read and then with a video call. You don't need to necessarily be face-to-face to get everyone to align on something. Whereas, if we're thinking about new ideas, if we're thinking about where we're trying to imagine, be more creative, brainstorm things, and come up with those ideas, being able to read that body language and being able to get a feeling from the energy that's in a room, that doesn't work effectively on a call. It also doesn't help that a divergent meeting is more likely to be longer, and I don't need to tell you, if you sit in a video call for more than an hour, I don't know, I stare out the window most of the time. Or look at all the other things in my office, which have got nothing to do with work. So divergent meetings are the ones where you want to be thinking about face-to-face. So this can be a really useful framework to use to assess beforehand, what do you want to get out of a meeting, and how do you think, therefore, it would be best to pitch that meeting, and whether it would be better to have it face-to-face or whether it can be on a call. And there's a really important point to take into account here, and this, I think the employee experience and the employee expectations have changed, which is, if you're going to get me to come to an office, there's got to be a reason, and that reason is definitely not to come to an office and sit in 4 hours of video calls that I can do better at home with better coffee and in a way that I can then effectively recover from that better in my own situation. So companies really need to start thinking about, why are people coming to the office? It's really for experiences. What's the experience of coming into the office that effectively, what's the hook that pulls us in?
Q squads assembles. So what are they? They happen quarterly, and it basically involves the whole squad getting together in one place. Developed by the squad and for the squad, we focus on team building, reflecting, planning and aligning, and making connections. So team building, this is all about getting to understand the dynamics of the squad, getting to know each other more. This might involve things like hack days or learning together. So yeah, just basically spending time together in real life doing stuff. Planning and aligning, so this is something that we do. They happen quarterly, so often this will kind of happily align with quarterly planning. We might spend some time thinking about what's coming up for the quarter, things that the business or the team want to tackle. Pre-mortem, so if we're coming up to a big peak, and we are a very peaky business, or big releases that we know are on the horizon. Kick-off sessions for big projects, discovery sessions where we're involved like a broader team that we might not always get to see all the time in our daily kind of squad sessions, and thinking about our squad visions and missions. Can also spend some time looking backwards. So reflecting, so retrospectives on the past quarter instead of just our regular kind of sprint retrospectives. Health checks, so just capturing a moment in time, seeing how the squad's getting on, planning out any actions that we want to take as a result. Post-mortems for big incidents, learning from those. Wash-ups on big projects, and just showing kudos and generally kind of, patting each other on the back and saying how awesome we are. All of that stuff that I've just spoken about are really good examples of divergent thinking and where that kind of comes into play. And then, of course, like making connections. So this might be workshops with other areas of the business. So again, I think one of the things that happens with remote working is you kind of see the people that you deal with a lot of the time, but you don't necessarily see people from the wider business. So cross-squad workshops and sessions. So my squad recently had a really good workshop with our checkout and payment squad about some loyalty work that we're looking to pick up, getting external speakers and presenters in, and visiting warehouses. So we have this whole side of the business that's all focused on production and procurement of the bouquets. And often if you're working on the e-commerce side, you kind of feel quite far away from that. So it's nice to kind of touch base there. And look at all these people, happy, smiley people, hanging out together, socializing, grinning away. That was that one that we just did with the checkout and payment squad. I think I took the photo, so that's online. And do they work? I guess the feedback would suggest so. So people are really into them. And we've definitely seen a kind of positive impact as a result. I'll give you a chance to read through a few of those if you fancy it.
These are all real, by the way. Yeah, if you think about all those different activities and how we've effectively split those up, they're all about experiences. So they're all intended to have a hook that if you're in a squad, you think, okay, I want to go to that. That's interesting. That's exciting. I'm going to see somebody. I'm going to learn something. So it's almost very much like a conference. It's very much about hooking people back, not forcing people back. But it would be wrong for us to say, okay, we do all this and it's great and there are no disadvantages and why don't you all do it too? So there are some disadvantages or some things to look out for when you're taking this sort of approach. As we said, we do this quarterly. So this does come at a cost. So we have 30% of our team are fully remote. Some of them are across different countries in the EU. So as somebody who's got the technology budget responsibility, then there was obviously a bit of work here to do to make sure that we could secure the money to make these happen. The travel costs add up a little bit. It disrupts the working week for a squad. What we try and do, though, is we try and do all of these squads assembles for all of our 6 squads in the same week. So effectively, from a delivery perspective, that it drops the capacity down for everybody, and therefore it's a lot easier to then manage that across the whole team. We're looking at how best ways we can adapt our office environment. So our office environment is still very much about people come in, they sit in rows, they stare at screens, which worked really well when we were there 5 days a week and the whole office was full, whereas I think it's very much around how can we adapt our office environment so it's more about creativity and it's more about workshop spaces or multifunctional spaces. It takes time to prepare for something like squads assembled. You don't want to bring your entire team into the office and don't have a good reason for them to be there. So there's a preparation time. There's also a recovery time. I don't know if you can remember the first time you went back into an office sort of post lockdowns. I came home, I was exhausted. And because a lot of our teams don't go into the office very regularly, then we have to allow for the fact that there's a cognitive recovery time to suddenly having like a day or two with your squad. And we're also looking at how we can broaden this approach, because at the moment it's squad to squad, so it builds bonds within the squad and maintains those bonds. How can we broaden that? For example, we're big exponents of the communities of practice model internally. Now, our communities of practice don't get together face to face very often, if at all. This could work for them too. So here's some tips if you think this is a good idea and you want to think about how could I run my own assembles. So firstly, don't make assumptions. So think about what people miss. So within your team, think about what they miss when they're fully remote. Ask them what they miss. And then make sure that you design something, or you work with them to design something that works. And focus this on activities that really build those connections. If you think about some of the examples Ella gave earlier, these are all about activities that are there to build or maintain those social connections within the squads. And as I say, ask them what they want to do. Don't assume. And one really good reason to ask them what they want to do and get engagement from the beginning is that you then don't put all the pressure on yourself to organise things. Because there's a real danger, if you're running a squad in particular or a team, that pressure of, oh my God, I'm inviting all these people over and it's costing all this money and I need to make sure they have a brilliant time. And oh God, the stress really runs up. It should make it a squad thing, because you get much better engagement when you do that.
Like with my team, they might just say, we just want to code together. We just want to work on things together. Like, great, okay, I don't need to plan anything, it's great.
And some things that have really helped us. So setting goals for a day for a squad assemble, for example, are important, because I'll use an example. If I was traveling for quite a long time, maybe if I lived in, we've got folks that live in Portugal, for example. If I'm traveling over from Portugal, I'm leaving my family behind in Portugal, it might have been a bit hard to get that couple of days arranged. There might have been childcare to think about. I need a really clear goal and a really clear reason to come. So make sure you've got clear goals for the day. But when people are together, what we've found is you can be super relaxed about whether you actually meet those goals. Because as long as people are getting those connections, as long as people are in the same place, and as long as they feel like they're doing something that supports each other, they're normally absolutely fine with that. And the feedback indicates they had a really, really good time. And we've also found a lot of the liberating structures, if any of you I can see some nods, brilliant. Know much about that. We've found a number of different liberating structures have been useful for providing a framework or a starting point for some of the activities. Equally, though, just doing something simple like a lean coffee or running something on a kind of unconference type agenda or agenda list even can really, really work, because it's about getting that team engagement, those social bonds really high, and it's about getting your team doing things they want to focus on, like Ella mentioned before. So we've had an instance like within Ella's squad where what if folks actually they just wanted to get together and code together in the same room because they haven't been able to do that, and that's great. That doesn't require much preparation whatsoever. And if you're not, I mean, we're talking a lot about workshops here, let's be honest, and if you've not run workshops before, you're a little bit worried about how to do it, that's my absolute go-to book on running workshops. I'd really recommend having a look at that one. It's really, really good. Gives some really, really good sort of hints, tips, frameworks, and ways of working.
So, to sum it all up, we went mostly remote, as did lots of you by those things. Figured personal connections equals higher engagement. That's, kind of a given. It's kind of obvious, but so how do we make that happen? Squads assembles are there. They help build that social connection. It's definitely not a silver bullet. This is not going to solve all of your problems, but it definitely helps. We're still trying to adapt, and we will continue doing that and continue learning. But yeah, why not try it for yourself? So that's it. This has been us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, amazing. Any questions? We've got one here.
So the company is trying to get people to do cross-company things, but they're putting them all in the evening, and I'm getting really tired of banging my head going, some of us have childcare, and I need to pick my kid up from nursery. Have you got any recommendations on how to do stuff that's actually inclusive of everybody's lifestyle?
I think push for doing it in the day. Like, I think it's like, that would be my honest advice, because it's like, these things are important, and it's important that everybody's there. So it's like, you know, we would take, you know, when we're there, I will take a 2-hour slot for lunch. We're not going to be like, oh no, buy the book, it's just going to be 1 hour, because what's important is people are sat together, spending time together. And likewise, like, I don't know, people have done random stuff like mini golf and stuff like that. So it's like, I think it's that if the focus is on the value of getting people together, then that's yeah, it should be happening in work time.
What we've also found really useful with these is a couple of times a year we have like maybe a company celebration or something. Is so actually aligning the squads assembled day with that celebration. So if there is already something in the evening, then it kind of it means that those who can't make that still get something out of the squads assemble, and those that maybe do want to do something in the evening, there's something else but it doesn't feel like you're necessarily missing out on something that's squad based, because it's a much broader thing.
Hiya. So we're doing a lot of the things that you're doing, so it's really encouraging to see that. Some people don't miss anything at all. So we're at a point where we're trying to bring people and trying to do the hook thing and not mandating people in, but at the same point you tend to get the same people coming to stuff and the same people not, so you end up being hybrid, which is the worst of both worlds, because if one's remote, everybody should be remote.
Yeah.
Is that help, basically? Is that have you had the same problems, and how do you kind of rectify that in any way?
So if someone can't come to the day, like they're not joining in the day, is how I do it. So it's like an in-person day, and because otherwise you can run into those complexities of trying to, you end up using Miro, and you're like, this is not the point. Like, we've been doing this for the rest of the year. Like, we're here to get the Post-it notes out, look at each other in the faces. So there's been a couple of occasions when people haven't been able to come, and that's okay. But like, predominantly it's been, like 90% attendance, and someone couldn't come because they were going on holiday the next day. So it's like, there's reasons, as opposed to I don't feel like it. But I don't know. Have you heard of anyone encountering? I think
there's a. I think not for the squads assembles themselves, because we do them quarterly, so it's 4 times a year. I think we have a couple of squads where there's a majority of them on maybe 1 day a week, because they all happen to live like satellite to London, might go into our London office, and some of them don't live close to London. But for those squads, we go with the, if one person's remote, you all need to work remote or be seen to be remote. And we find that balance between getting the whole squad together and providing those kind of really big hooks 4 times a year means that you're trying to kind of just balance it out, so the folks that are fully remote don't feel really excluded, and the folks that are together don't feel like that they're only that they can basically replicate squads assemble every Monday or something, because that's where it becomes a problem. I think is it starts to become divisive in a squad. And from my perspective, I don't want to constrain the flexibility of the engineering team to say all the fully remote people are in 1 or 2 squads and all the hybrid-y people are in another squad, because it's not flexible enough.
I know you mentioned work style as well, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but there's a really good book on that subject called Work Style, and so you might want to, that might be useful. I think we had a question along here.
Hi there. So I work in a team where some of the members are located in India and in the Philippines, which is not uncommon. So it is really impractical to have sort of in-person sessions several times a year. It would be awesome having them every quarter, but it's just not possible. It costs way too much money and it's not very environmentally friendly. So have you had success with any fully remote sessions that sort of replace this or simulate it in a good way that you can do with everyone being remote?
I think what we've tended to do, hopefully everyone can hear me without the mic. Cool. What we've tended to do in a few, we have a little sort of case, similar sort of case in our platform team. And what we've tended to do is actually just encourage the folks that are closer together geographically to get together a bit more, as opposed to the whole squad. So it's a compromise and it's a trade-off, but it still means that you've got some folks getting together a little bit, because otherwise it does become harder. So speaking as budget holder, if people are saying, oh yeah, I need to fly everybody from the Philippines and India to the UK 4 times a year, I would be worried about exactly the same things, the cost, the environmental impact as well. So it is always going to be a bit of a compromise in that sort of situation if you aren't able to, I guess, change the organisational model to actually cluster those sorts of people together, because there's obviously there's other pros and cons that are outside of employee engagement that come from having folks in time zones that are very, very, very far away.
Thank you.
A couple on this side, I think.
Awesome.
Hi, so you talked about measuring the costs of getting the meetings, or the measure of the cost. Have you looked at any of the measure of the benefits of having those meetings?
Yeah, so we run employee NPS like surveys within tech every 6 months, and we also make sure at the end of a squad's assemble that there is a feedback mechanism. So that's where some of the comments that you saw there came from. So it's really important. You need to find out what works and what doesn't work, and it's different for different squads. They have different needs. They're geographically located in different ways. Kind of the social connections in those squads are also different. So yeah, it's all about basically getting the feedback. I'm not too concerned about how qualitative that we make that feedback and whether it sums up to a nice graph or anything. For me, it's like the happiness of the squad is the important indicator.
So my question is not necessarily about Blooming Wild, but I'm just curious. I'm quite a cynic, but Gallup had an employee satisfaction survey, and they've done that for many, many years. And prior to the pandemic, a lot of study came out and said that there was a high degree of dissatisfaction within the workplace, or employee dissatisfaction. I'm just wondering, have you got any views about how that potentially could have an impact on people wanting to work remotely, and be symptomatic almost of that data point that you put on the slide? So you mean a survey done pre kind of remote working as a norm? Correct. There was a level of dissatisfaction. Yeah, there was. I mean, it's quite a famous one that's been going around for many years about the low levels of employee satisfaction. I'm just curious to know if you think maybe this, the will to want to work remotely is symptomatic of that that dissatisfaction in the workplace. I think some of that dissatisfaction may well have come from the root cause may have been the almost forced separation between personal life and professional life. If you think about it like that, and I think that has acted as a bit of a kind of hook for people working more remotely. Is you can I don't know, speaking for myself, I can manage my life and I see my children much more now than I did pre-pandemic, and for me that's a good thing. But I think it's just doing that, I think, would be too much. And I think just doing a 9 to 5 would be too much. And I also think we didn't used to do quite so much of the sort of squads assemble piece as a big thing pre-pandemic. So it was just more of a kind of like employee engagement was just something that bubbled along effectively. In the background, you did little bits and pieces. Whereas I think the advantage of remote working here is we can make more of a deal of it, basically. Yeah. I'm just wondering, had you undertaken any employee satisfaction surveys prior and post pandemic? I'm just curious if you've done that.
We have, although we scaled so rapidly
Yeah.
in the period between 2020 and 2022. I think we were scaling the engineering team 43-44% year on year through that period. So it's difficult to make the comparison between one and the other. I think there are too many variables in it.
Okay. Right.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to time. So let's give Stephen and Ella a massive round of applause.